You're about to listen to Professor Mrs. OYINADE OLURIN's response letter to Mr. Ademola Odutola, the second son of Chief Odutola, dated December 13, 1995, exactly 8 months after Chief Odutola's murder. Mr. Ademola Odutola had earlier written to Mrs. OYINADE OLURIN on October 30, 1995, 6 months after Chief Odutola's murder, accusing her of involvement in Chief Odutola's murder on Thursday, April 13, 1995. Here's Professor Mrs. OYINADE OLURIN's response letter. OYINADE Odutola Olurin, 8 Ladoke Akintola Avenue, Bodija P.O. Box 7578, Section BO Ibadan, Oyo State. Telephone 02-810-1469. 13th December 1995. Mr. Ademola A. Odutola. Julie O. Business Enterprises Limited. PO Box 3768. Surulere, Lagos. My dear brother, Ademola, I hope all is well with you and your family. Your letter dated 30th October 1995 did not get to me until today, although I saw a copy last week. You omitted to let me know the circulation. My first impression was to ignore your letter because it appeared absolutely ridiculous and full of malicious insinuations. But I was advised that in law, however stupid allegations might sound, one must always try to reply to all the points. Your letter is so full of false statements that it is difficult to know where to start, but maybe paragraph by paragraph for easy reference is the best thing. First of all, at the first family gathering, no one decided that I should formally inform the family of his last moments alive. I volunteered the information which I had after he had died. The last time I saw him alive was Tuesday 11th April with Mrs. Saad Safola and Papa's doctor. I left before both of them to take some blood samples to Ibadan at the request of the attending doctor. I had planned to see him in any case again on Thursday morning before embarking on the preparations for my son's wedding, and I had alerted Mrs. B.C. Bataille that I was going to see Papa and she wanted to go with me. I, however, got a telephone call from Mr. Ignatius early on Thursday morning to tell me that his health situation was very critical. I told the caller that his doctor should be called to see him, and I traveled immediately to Ijebu Ode with Mrs. Bataille. Your information about nurses is of course entirely false. The nurses who had been arranged for Papa by the doctor in Ijebu Ode General Hospital had left a week or two before Papa died. I am sure Papa's brother Alhaji Ja Odutola did not tell you that I saw him on the day Papa died. I have since not had any conversation with him on the matter. I certainly would not have gone visiting anybody with a supposedly critically ill man in the vehicle. I am a doctor, not a socialite. If Mama Bisoye told you she assisted Papa with his bath, that's her affair. My information was that the men who looked after Papa found him dead in the morning. Olu Odutola was in the house when we got there, and he told us Papa had died and that he had informed Brother Ladipo. I had myself alerted Brother on Wednesday evening that Papa was very ill. Papa had vomited some of the remains of the food he ate the night before. The tablets he took were on the outside of his mouth. Both the doctor and I confirmed that he had been dead for a few hours. There are signs which we saw which, honestly, one could not expect you to understand. The doctor did not have a suitable ambulance, so he arranged for one from the brewery. Of course, Papa was helpless, as you say. He was dead. The dead are usually helpless, so that statement is quite correct. Unfortunately, he could not ask to put a cap on, as you suggested, and he certainly could not sit up. I am not sure what you mean by my prize catch. A dead man, not for eating or for sale, is hardly a prize catch to any sane person. Papa had always advocated that he be embalmed and not refrigerated, and the best place I know for that was the anatomy department in Ibadan. I did not ask them to paint him black. I am sorry if you still have doubts that it was really Papa that died and was buried. He had his ring on his finger and it was buried with him. He had left instructions with some of us as to when he was to be buried. I did not know what instructions he had left in his will or in his safe until that was opened in front of everybody. I did ask if you wanted his body brought back to Ijebu-Ode on the Sunday, but consensus was that he should be left in Ibadan until the day before the burial. As for the keys with which you seem to be so obsessed, the explanation is quite simple. On Monday, the 10th of April, when Mama Yinka telephoned to tell me that Papa was very drowsy, she said she was afraid that someone may give him a check to sign by default in his drowsy state, and that I should come and take his checks. I had no intention of doing this, but it would have been irresponsible of me not to heed her warning. I therefore asked Mr. Francis where the checkbooks were, and he said they were in the cabinet, not the safe. I asked him to lock the cabinet and give me the keys. I told him that if Papa asked for the keys, I would bring them immediately, but for the time being I left some petty cash with him in case Papa needed some before I could return his keys. I never did have the keys of the safe. When we were leaving Papa's room to go to Ibadan, Mrs. Adeyemi had joined us. She was on her way from Lagos to Ibadan and decided to pay Papa a visit before going to Ibadan. We asked Mr. Francis to put the box which contained all the important keys into the cabinet and lock it and give me the keys. When we locked the door of the room, I asked to keep the key because with the key of the cabinet in my custody, I did not want anyone to enter the room and tamper with the cabinet. The safe, in my opinion, was tamper-proof. Since I live in Ibadan, it is highly unlikely that I would sneak into Onibudo House at night and start rummaging in the cabinet or the safe without the house staff being aware of it. When the family met and wanted to look for burial instructions which Tokunbo said was in the safe, I did not go with the party that went downstairs. If I was depending on Papa's will to exist, I suppose I would have been tempted to go and rummage in his safe as some people would have done. I did not want to, and I did not see any part of Papa's will until it was read to all of us at Abeokuta. If you or anyone else for that matter is unhappy about the will or anything to do with Papa's death, the correct place to go is to court and demand that all the facts be laid bare instead of the incessant malicious gossips, accusations, and bitter wrangling which have been going on since Papa died. I have no intention of meeting you or anyone else anywhere outside Onibudo House. Our only connection with each other is Papa, and if you want to talk to me, see me there or in court. I hope I have been able to put a few facts straight for your consumption, and for those who, like you, are still anxious to know how their father died, or if in fact he did die, or was killed on the way to Ibadan. With my kindest regards, yours sincerely, signed by OYINADE OLURIN, OYINADE Odutola OLURIN. A P.S. Since I do not know how many other people besides Professor Mabogunje received copies of your letter, perhaps you could be so kind as to give my reply as wide a circulation as yours. I am sending you a few copies. Oyin. Okay, you've listened to her defense letter. Here are the known facts. Professor Mrs. OYINADE OLURIN fabricated the degrading account of Chief Odutola's final hours. It is entirely false, a web of blatant lies. Eyewitnesses confirmed that Chief Odutola was alive and even asked for his cap before being forcibly removed from his home. This has been thoroughly explained and narrated in earlier videos. Moreover, Mrs. Ademola Odutola, his wife of 40 years who had just finished caring for him, stated that he showed no signs of distress and, as usual, had told her what he wanted for lunch. Had there been any change in his condition, she would have immediately called for help. So, why would Mrs. OYINADE OLURIN fabricate the degrading account of Chief Odutola's final hours, apart from trying to justify that he was already dead when she got to the house? This is why, despite her public display of love and affection for Chief Odutola, Mrs. OYINADE OLURIN's actions have consistently degraded Chief Odutola and his legacy. Her public performative affection served only to elevate her own image, basking in the glory and status of being called the daughter of an iconic statesman. This is a woman who began degrading and dismantling his memory almost immediately after orchestrating his murder. A woman deranged with greed and obsessed with social climbing, often referred to as the Bride of Lucifer, Mrs. OYINADE OLURIN and her sister, Mrs. Adebisi Bataye, repeatedly used deceit, coercion, and pressure to insist that Chief Odutola's remains be kept at the Department of Anatomy until his burial, and ultimately push for a hasty burial, contrary to her claim that these decisions were based on family consensus. Not even the most basic public tribute befitting his stature was observed, and only a few weeks after his burial, she disgracefully threw his clothes onto the tennis court for anyone to sort through. Also, despite knowing she lacked the capacity to run or manage the factories, and ignoring a strong viability report, particularly favoring the biscuit factory, she used forged documents to prevent Chief Odutola's biological sons, some of whom had worked alongside him for decades, from taking over the operation of the 4 factories and farm. She subsequently sold off the machinery and shut down the 4 factories. She sold off the machinery and destroyed the factories of the founder of Manufacturers Association of Nigeria and the president for its first 11 years. Most recently, she permitted the main house, his iconic residence built in 1939 and filled with personal history, to be used as a movie set, allowing cast members to roam freely through his private spaces and bedrooms. These acts were not innocent. They were deliberate efforts to tarnish the legacy of a statesman, dishonor an iconic man, and desecrate the sanctity of his home. There is a separate video that explains why Mrs. OYINADE OLURIN and her sister, Mrs. Adebisi Bataye, harbored deep resentment toward Chief Odutola and his biological children, especially his biological sons. For months following Chief Odutola's murder, Professor Mrs. OYINADE OLURIN consistently gave conflicting accounts, particularly regarding whether Chief Odutola was still alive while being transported in the ambulance or already deceased at the house that morning when she arrived. For months leading up to her letter, she repeatedly left this critical question unanswered. If she found Chief Odutola dead at the house, why didn't she allow his 2 wives, who were present in the compound at the time, and both lived just 35 meters from the main house, to see his body? Why were his younger brother, Alhaji Jimo Odutola, who lived just across the street, and his first son, Mr. Oladipo Odutola, who also resided in Ijebu Ode, not asked to see his body either? Alternatively, if he passed away en route to Ibadan, why take him to the Department of Anatomy, University of Ibadan, instead of the University College Hospital where a physician could have formally certified his death? After all, this was a statesman, one of Nigeria's wealthiest men in 1995. While Mrs. OYINADE OLURIN effectively admitted in her letter that she was present at Onibudo House on Monday, April 10, Tuesday the 11th, and Thursday the 13th, 1995, the individuals she named as her alibis, Mrs. Adebisi Bataye, Mrs. Deshola Adeyemi, Mrs. Shade Shofala, Mr. Olu Odutola, and Mrs. Modupe Odutola, also known as Mama Yinka, were, in fact, accomplices in the murder of Chief Odutola. All of them significantly benefited from ill-gotten wealth, and except from Mrs. Shade Shofola, were eventually appointed as directors of Odutola's estate. Among her additional named alibis were Mr. Ignatius Agbakani, Chief Odutola's secretary and typist for about 30 years, who supplied Mrs. OYINADE OLURIN and her husband, Professor Emmanuel Olurin, with a copy of the true last will, and Mr. Francis, a member of Chief Odutola's domestic staff and a close associate of Mr. Ignatius Agbakani. Both men hailed from the same village in southeast Nigeria. Crucially, Mrs. Modupe Odutola, Mama Yinka, Chief Odutola's last wife, a known prostitute in 1950s Ijebu Ode, and one of Madam Ayinka Aberwagba's prostitute, was not at Onabudo House on Monday, April 10, 1995, contrary to Mrs. Olurin's claims. In fact, she was also absent on Tuesday, April 11th, and Thursday, April 13th. She had departed the compound about a week earlier, stating she was going to visit her daughter in Port Harcourt. In truth, Chief Odutola had been preparing to have her arrested for switching and tampering with his medication, a looming threat that prompted the conspirators to hastily advance their plot. With the exception of Mama Yinka, who wasn't present at Onibudo House on any of those days, it's important to note that neither Mrs. Olurin nor any of her named alibis resided within the compound. Most lived in Lagos or Ibadan, several kilometers away from Ijebu Ode. So why would Mrs. Olurin seek to discredit the account of Mrs. Adeola Odutola, Mama Bisoye, Chief Odutola's wife of 40 years, who lived just 35 meters behind the main house and had cared for him only hours before he was forcibly removed from his home? You be the judge. Well, Mrs. OYINADE OLURIN could not, and did not, mention Mrs. Adeola Odutola as an alibi because Mrs. Adeola Odutola witnessed an entirely different sequence of events. Unlike Mrs. OYINADE Olurin's alibis, Mrs. Adeola Odutola actually lived within the compound and was the wife actively caring for Chief Odutola. Mrs. Adeola Odutola was with Chief Odutola on the mornings of April 10th and 11th, 1995, an eyewitness to the events of both days. Then, on the morning of April 13th, 1995, after tending to Chief Odutola as usual, Mrs. Adeola Odutola returned to her apartment just 35 meters away, unaware that Mrs. OYINADE Olurin and her co-conspirators would soon forcibly remove her husband of 40 years from the house. She never saw his body until she visited the Department of Anatomy in Ibadan. Professor Mrs. OYINADE Olurin's repeated emphasis in her letter on not having the keys to the safe at Onibudo House on Monday, April 10, 1995, is a clear display of guilty conscience and calculated deflection. In truth, that very morning, she, along with Mrs. Adebisi Bateye, Mrs. Deshola Adeyemi, Mrs. Bimpe Oshinaike, and Mrs. Shade Shofola, looted the safe, removing Chief Odutola's gold, jewelry, and real estate documents under the pretense of taking them to the bank for safekeeping. Chief Odutola called his third son, Mr. Sunday Adedapo Odutola, later that day to report the robbery. This brazen daylight robbery was also documented in a letter from Mr. Sunday Adedapo Odutola to Mrs. OYINADE Olurin, dated November 26, 1997. Mrs. OYINADE Olurin also claimed she never saw any part of Papa's will until it was read to the family in Abeokuta. That is a blatant lie. A copy of the true last will was secretly given to her and her husband by Ignatius Agbakani, Chief Odutola's secretary and typist. But the will that was read was a forged will, the will that had been doctored and previously kept at Union Bank in Ijebu Ode with the assistance of Mrs. Ashiru, a senior staff member at Union Bank at the time. When Mrs. OYINADE Olurin and Mr. Sunday Odutola went to retrieve the will in codicil, the bank produced a document dated May 19, 1995, supposedly bearing Chief Odutola's signature, over a month after his murder on April 13, 1995. Chief Odutola could not possibly have signed that document. Mrs. OYINADE Olurin colluded with Mrs. Ashiru, a senior staff member at Union Bank, to carry out a probate fraud. This incident was also documented in Mr. Sunday Adedapo Odutola's letter to Mrs. OYINADE Olurin, dated November 26, 1997, 2 years after Chief Odutola's murder. This was the forged will that was read to the family at the probate registry in Abeokuta, with the assistance of her lifelong friend, Justice Titilola Mabugunje, who was a judge of the Ogun State High Court at the time. On August 26, 1995, less than 4 months after Chief Odutola's murder, in a strategic move to avoid prosecution, Mrs. OYINADE Olurin secretly launched her long-anticipated judicial influence peddling NGO negotiation and conflict management group with the help of her lifelong friends, Justice Mrs. Rosalind Omotosho, the Chief Judge of Lagos State at the time, 1995-1996, and Justice Titilola Mabugunje, Ogun State High Court Judge at the time, 1981-1999, along with Samuel Kayode Esho, Supreme Court Justice, 1978-1990. She then dressed up and propped up her 35-year-old penniless son-in-law, Kehinde Aina, as the NGO's frontman. The launch of her long-planned judicial influence peddling NGO on August 26, 1995, just 4 months before her response letter dated December 13, 1995, underscores the condescending and arrogant tone evident in that letter, including her brazen challenge to the family member to take her to court. The formation of the NGO, Negotiation and Conflict Management Group, and its role in the cover-up scheme remained unknown to the family until 29 years later, in November 2024. This discovery ultimately revealed that the Negotiation and Conflict Management Group, and by extension, the Lagos Multi-Door Courthouse, were the foundations of Mrs. Oyinade Olurin's staggering influence over the Nigerian judiciary, including the sitting Chief Justices, Supreme Court Justices, Chief Judges, and senior law enforcement officers. It explains how she managed to evade justice for so long. The extent of her reach is truly extraordinary. Additionally, as part of Mrs. Oyinade Olurin's cover-up and apparent efforts to evade justice, 3 of Chief Odutola's biological sons who challenged her in court lost their businesses and livelihoods, and later died under mysterious circumstances. Also, Mr. Ignatius, Chief Odutola's secretary and typist of about 30 years, who, years earlier, had secretly handed over a copy of Chief Odutola's true last will to Mrs. Oyinade Olurin and her husband, Professor Emmanuel Olurin, died under mysterious circumstances a few years after Chief Odutola's murder. His wife reportedly suffered a mental breakdown and committed suicide thereafter. Furthermore, Mr. Archibong, another member of Chief Odutola's domestic staff and an eyewitness to Chief Odutola's forced removal from the compound, was also later found dead under mysterious circumstances. Several lives have been destroyed, and others lost, in these murderers' relentless effort to cover up their crimes and evade justice.